Here we go. I see something. There he is. We have him. Oh my goodness.
This is the start of one of my favorite shows, For All Mankind.
After thousands of years, ladies and gentlemen, gazing up in the heavens and dreaming of this day, a man is about to set foot on the moon.
Plot twist, that's Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov. That small wrinkle escalates the space race and puts us on a completely different social, political, and technological timeline. And later on, during this alternative history, we see this device, the Apple Newton. Of course, with some added functionality. The cameo was a nice homage to a perhaps unfairly maligned piece of tech. The Newton line lasted just 5 years and sold a measly 200,000 units before the project was unceremoniously killed. It was a very hyped product, so it wouldn't be a stretch to say it was the biggest flop in Apple's history. But one thing you'll read over and over again is that the Newton, which came out in 1993, was way ahead of its time. Its ideas and technology, though, were no match for its ambitions. The most important feature of the Newton was its handwriting recognition. Apple had actually brought in a group of ex-Soviet scientists to develop it. In real life, not in the show. Handwriting recognition was supposed to be its killer feature, but unfortunately when it launched, it was pretty bad.
Hey Dolph, take a memo on your Newton. Beat up Martin.
Now the ridicule was probably excessive. Walt Mossberg actually said it was startlingly good, but then conceded it was too imperfect to lure most people from pen and paper. It got much better with Newton OS 2.0, but it seems all the negative press was just too much to come back from, and it's been said that the Newton's reputation was just tarnished beyond repair. Early Newtons were also underpowered and very pricey, and you had a bunch of accessories like a fax modem, a kit for syncing it to a computer, and even something to send and receive pages. Remember those? Yeah, altogether add-ons could run the price from an already expensive $700 all the way up to $1,500. Thanks to a good friend, I managed to get my hands on the first ever Newton, the MessagePad H1000. My first impression was that it didn't strike me as an Apple product. Now that's probably my modern sensibilities talking, but it turns out that a couple of years prior to the Newton, Apple fired Frog Design, the firm responsible for designing just about all their products, including the Macintosh. And so Apple took a different approach with the Newton, a dark and sleek aesthetic that they actually referred to as the Batman concept. The thing is, the new design might have been more than skin deep. The Newton was supposed to be CEO John Sculley's answer to Steve Jobs' Mac. It was the first major product developed under his leadership after the fallout with Jobs, who had resigned in 1985, and it was the product that was going to define Sculley's legacy. He even coined the term PDA, and to his credit, his vision was that the Newton would usher in a new era of mobile computing where PDAs were ubiquitous.
We're going to change our lives as much as the fax machine or the cellular telephone have in the last 10 years.
But even for its time, it's hard to imagine wanting to reach for this thing to jot something down. And despite Sculley's insistence that it fit in a suit pocket, it's still quite chunky and only got bigger over time. It makes me think that Apple had some misplaced priorities, sacrificing portability over features. Except for maybe tech enthusiasts, it's hard to see this being an everyday device. Believe it or not, there are people today who are still trying to keep the Newton's memory alive. It's taken on sort of a cult following. It's easy to romanticize tech from the past, especially with the benefit of hindsight, because the Newton's DNA is in Apple products today. Before Siri, the Newton had its own intelligent assistant. Before AirDrop, there was the Beam feature. Before autocorrect and predictive text, the Newton could learn new words and even adapt to your unique handwriting. It had its own third-party software ecosystem. You could even load flash drives with interactive maps of cities. And before today's Apple Silicon that powers iPhones and Macs, the Newton had its own ARM-based chip.
The Newton is the first volume product to use microprocessors developed by Advanced RISC Machines at Swaffham Bulbeck near Cambridge. Set up just 3 years ago by computer manufacturers Apple and Acorn, ARM's 46-strong research team has already perfected microchips for the consumer electronics sector that
In
are
fact,
a quarter of the size.
Apple took a stake in the fledgling company to create a chip specifically for the Newton. Had that not been the case, perhaps ARM wouldn't be what it is today. In case you didn't know, ARM-based chips are found in just about every smartphone on the planet. So yes, in many ways the Newton was ahead of its time, and it seems we eventually arrived at the future that it promised. You've probably noticed all the devices that your smartphone has replaced. Well, that sort of thing was also a part of the vision behind the Newton. For the Newton, I guess you could say it wanted to be more than what the state of technology at the time would allow it to be. Apple had the right idea, but the timing wasn't right. You've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards for the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it. Apart from technological limitations, I think the Newton's fatal flaw is that it didn't know who it was for or what problem it was solving. I think where Scully deserves criticism was in failing to focus the project and define its core audience and use case, something that Jobs did very effectively with the iPhone. In fact, I'm convinced that a lot of the decisions made about the iPhone were because of lessons learned from the Newton. I think a lot of mythology exists around the Newton because of its untimely death. It's tempting to think of what might have happened if the Newton had succeeded, if Apple found a way to make it indispensable. What would Apple look like today? Would we still have gotten the iPod and the iPhone? Would John Scully have left the company, paving the way for Steve Jobs to return? Perhaps Apple never sells its stake in ARM because they don't need the cash. Maybe a wildly successful PDA from Apple is the catalyst for all sorts of other innovations in mobile-centric technology in the 90s. And who knows, in an alternate history, we might have been using it to make video calls from outer space.